Hello and welcome to overview of Essentials of Social Media Marketing, Chapter 3. Today we are looking at the building of a social media strategy, which includes 10 steps that you will be looking at that should take you and your brand from nothing to something that is a more coherent and at least a strategy to begin with. Today I'm going to walk through the actual textbook courseware chapter pages online. I'm not going to be looking at any slides, but I will be going through some of the text to show what's going to be relevant and not relevant here over the following weeks. So go ahead and share my screen, turn off my video, and we'll start looking at this here. So here I am on the first page here, section 1. First off, to give you a quick reminder, the way that these are worded and numbered, step 1 is actually the second part of the chapter. I ran into this confusion the first time I read this and thought, wait a minute, their first step is developing a social media strategy. But really, this is just an overview section that I do want to scroll through real quickly. First off, it is going to be important to understand what a social media marketing strategy is, but then also what a social media marketing plan is and how that differentiates, how that's different from a strategy. A lot of times throughout my career, I've been asked to provide strategies, provide a plan, provide something. There's so many semantics that go into kind of how you define these various digital marketing strategies. But the bottom line is that the higher ups and the powers that be are always looking for something coherent, cohesive, and concise, the three co's, that will be able to communicate with them what it is that you're trying to do on social media. The textbook that I used to use in this course, I think I mentioned this earlier, the textbook I used to use showed a study that was taken of CEOs about 5 years ago that showed that the C-suite did not understand or value the efforts that social media does for a brand. They didn't believe that social media actually made a difference on the bottom line. They didn't think it improved brand awareness. They didn't really think it was useful. And as a result, we ended up with kind of where we are today, which is an overemphasis on analytics, really needing to document everything, and really the way that I look at it in digital marketing, really needing to show efforts and successes at every step. This is not the Mad Men era. This is not the 50s and 60s where you could just put up a billboard and if it looks cool, the client and all the decision makers will hand over and throw their money out. No, this is the era of attribution, which we'll look at throughout the course, but then also the time where everything needs to be documented, all the planning, all the strategy, when you're going to be posting stuff, what you're going to be posting, the timing, things like that. And that's where we are here. So the place that I'm starting off here, first off, for the purposes of this course, you are only going to actually need to know for the exam 5 of these 10 steps. As much as I like these steps that the author has put in here, and as much as I like to believe that these strategies are very in-depth and advanced, they really aren't. And it really just comes down to 5 steps the way that I see it. I've developed dozens of these throughout my career, and I can tell you there are some of these, they're all important, but when you're creating a strategy, you really don't need all of this stuff. That is both, I mean, for yourself, internally, yeah, you should probably know everything. But when it comes to putting it on paper and thinking through what it is that you're going to be actually doing, you really don't need all of these up front. Some of these also will come later naturally. And we'll go through these momentarily. But when you're looking at these 10 steps, it's really not as big of a deal as the textbook makes it seem. Also, I do want to mention this before I dig into the steps. I'm going to talk about social media advertising at a later time. This is really a lot of you put in your first discussion post that you were interested in social media advertising, and paid social is a huge part of social media. Absolutely. That is for later in the semester. I'm not really sure why this is in this chapter. I think there was enough there on the strategy side as it was. But we're going to really dig into advertising more a little bit later on. Um, to take all of it at once is a little much, and it can be confusing because paid social and organic social are two very different things. They should not be strategies that overlap. And while they can be complementing each other, and yes, a strategy on social media should include the paid side, um, you really need to master the organic side first. If you create a Facebook page for a brand and you immediately start boosting posts and creating ads, you're not going to see a lot of success. You might see some post level engagements, you might see some likes, some shares, but a lot of users take the approach of, I like this post, I'll give it a like, but now I'm going to go look at the page and see if it's worth a follow. And if they go to your page and they see content that first off doesn't resonate with them, or maybe there's no content at all, or there's no followers, a page with 5 followers running an ad is a little suspicious. They're not going to give you the follow and you're not going to be able to see a true payoff on your ads. And that's why I really don't understand why advertising is included in this chapter, because if you are building a brand from scratch and you're building a strategy here on social media, that's going to be advertising needs to come later. You need to build a brand organically to begin with. You need to start building your community. You need to share valuable content, and then you can bring in the advertising to really scale the page. But again, organic social media is really the necessary first step here. I will approach advertising much more later on, I promise. For now, we're going to start off with the development of a social media marketing strategy. And just to wrap up the advertising side, please don't confuse the two. When we say social media marketing strategy, that is organic number one. When we think about the combination of the two, the paid social side, should be treated a little differently. Again, you can introduce boosted posts and some advertising into a social media strategy, but if your social media strategy largely relies on spending money, then that is not a social media marketing strategy. That is a social media advertising strategy. That is going to be addressed later. So let's go ahead and dig into the first step, or I guess to step back, this overview. There's this funny little video here, not funny, clever video done by the Content Marketing Institute, one of the brands that I really value and respect the most. This video kind of gives you a really quick overview of what the visual content chapter is going to be in the content marketing textbook. But more importantly, they are going to talk about the different touch points that leads and future customers are going to have with the brand. So it's worth watching. It's less than 3 minutes. It's worth checking out. If for nothing else than to use for the idea that one piece of content is not going to be enough to turn somebody from a cold lead and in meeting the brand for the first time and turn them into a customer. On the marketing principles video that I created earlier, I talk about the AIDA funnel and how micro purchases do happen and that people can be moved from the attention phase all the way into the action and purchasing phase. Yes, that can happen with one interaction, but there are multiple pieces of content that occur and that the user interacts with. It's not just an infographic, for example. There's going to be something on a website. There's going to be some sort of content that is consumed, that's written content. There's going to be other visual content. There's always going to be more than one thing that converts a user, and that is really what this video tries to say. But okay, we look at the steps. To give you a little spoiler alert, the following steps will be I consider to be more valuable and thus will be on the exam. Those are steps 1, 3, 1, identify a target market and create personas. 3, establish goals, objectives, and metrics. 5, establish a tone of voice. 8, create a distribution and content strategy. And 10, track, analyze, and tune. Not to say that 2, 4, 6, 7, and 9 are not valuable. Those are just, to me, things that you can do things that you can do a little bit later on. I also don't think that they all are worth necessarily their own steps. For example, conducting a social media audit. Yeah, that's cool. That's important. And it's really important for the final project. And you're going to get a whole separate video on this step by itself. However, this is not like, I agree that the audit is going to be important, but I don't think you need to go into this level of detail, in this level of manual detail when creating a strategy. So they talk about SWOT analysis. They talk about like specific things you need to do. If you want to look at this now for your final project, you can, but this is not what I'm going to require at all for the final project. It takes a very elementary look at social media and what an existing brand would have. I also don't think a social media audit. I also think this is somewhat limiting. It doesn't look at the content on the brand's website. It doesn't look at the brand itself overall, the organizational structure and strategy. All of those are important to establish and to review before creating a strategy. When you're creating a social media strategy, you need to know the assets that you have to work with before you can truly develop it. And the way that this looks at it right now, you're fairly limited in what you're actually looking at. Yes, you can look at social media success, what they've done in the past, but the past can only truly predict and establish a certain amount of context for you. And that is when you think about like the example that the author loves to talk about in this book is going to the Wendy's social media persona. They think this is a really good example, and it is. Wendy's is a great example on social media of one that established an alter ego and a really strong tone of voice. When they did that, they probably didn't need to go to conduct much of a social media audit because they were really starting over. Sure, some things might have been worthwhile. Yes, grab the follower count, the engagement rate, some of the KPIs so that you can see what your baseline is. But overall, not really that important. So that's my piece about the social media audit. But let's go through the steps that we are going to look at. One, you need to identify a target market and create some personas. There's an overlap here with the marketing principles chapter of the content marketing book. The thing that's really important here on step one is the kind of persona to establish, and really trying to understand how personas relate directly to social media. I would recommend, if you haven't already, I would recommend reading the marketing principles chapter first in the content marketing book, and then coming over here and looking at these steps. None of these steps are, by the way, are very long. You'll see I can scroll through these pretty quickly. I mean, there's only a couple hundred words here. It's not super intense on each step. So let's go to step three. Goals, objectives, and metrics. This is very important. I think the establishing of your key performance indicators or KPIs is one of the most important steps in the strategy. That you need to have goals that are smart. They need to be measurable. They need to be relevant. They need to be the whole thing. They need to be timely. They need to be attainable. They need to be, they're all right here: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. This is going to be an important thing on the final project, in that when you go to create a future strategy, the goals you must have need to be smart. That is, in the past, I have often had to dock pretty significant points because a group will come in and say, "Hey, we've reviewed your social media so far, and we think you're going to be able to triple your following in the next 12 months." That's just not attainable at all. That's very, very much out of reach, I would say. And unless they have a rock star social media marketer that is going to spend every cent of marketing budget on ads, it's probably not going to work. So that's something to keep in mind here. When we look at KPIs too and objectives, we want to be sure that your from when you move from goals to objectives to metrics, it's essentially how you take a larger ambiguous idea and turn it into something that's trackable. So this is a good graphic. One, say you have a goal, you want to increase brand awareness. Okay, what are those objectives? How can you tell that you actually are going to meet those goals? Now, objectives are numbers. They are looking at the actual KPIs, and it's a growth metric. I want to increase X. I want to decrease. I don't think you'd want to decrease anything, but you want to increase certain things. Um, this is a pretty basic goals, objectives, metrics doc image. Um, if you want to just steal this, I guess you can. But brand awareness is the number one um, reason that brands use social media. But if you take a look at objectives or how you want to increase, how you want things to change, what is the delta, and then the metrics is the actual number. Um, so I think most students struggle with the difference between an objective and a metric. Objective is how you want to improve. Metrics are the actual numbers themselves. What are the number of new followers? What are the number of new likes? What are the numbers of page views and visitors? And what is the revenue from social media posts? Those are really the key things there. And then let's go to step 5. Establishing a tone of voice. This is a critical step here. Again, pretty straightforward, pretty short. These questions are valuable to ask. If the brand were a person, what would that person's personality be? How would the brand speak with customers, et cetera, et cetera? The key thing here to know is that your tone of voice does not have to mirror the brand, as we saw with the Wendy's example at the bottom of this page. Um, that's a pretty good example. I actually would argue as well that the tone of voice on social media should not be the same as what a tone of voice for the brand at large would be. It needs to deviate at least a little bit. And if it was me developing it, I would want to make sure that it's somewhat relatable back to the original brand. But yeah, it shouldn't be the exact same thing. With a company like with a retail, with a retail, with a restaurant like Wendy's, they they have the advantage of being a global brand that just about everybody knows about. Everybody has heard of Wendy's. Everybody's probably been there at least once. They don't have a ton of brand building to do. If anything, they had to do a little deconstruction so that people were going to see what they were all about on social media, find some interest in it, and then give them a follow. Um, this is not something I would recommend that you do with any of your companies unless you are fortunate enough to be working with a global brand. Most of the time in these courses, the final project is with a small business located in Southeast Michigan, or somewhere else. Maybe it's an online retailer, but 99% of the time, this is going to be a brand that does not have a global familiarity with it. And it's not a place like Wendy's where it's largely based on they get customers based on, oh, driving by, oh, I could go for some Wendy's right now. That's not going to be a lot of businesses that groups are studying. Rather, you're going to need to your goal with social media, if it is brand awareness, needs to be building on top of what the full brand tone of voice is. So again, deviate a little bit, but don't go 180 degrees like Wendy's does here. It's only going to lead to confusion, and likely is going to lead to some brand damage. With Wendy's, it was more of like the first time people saw those tweets, people were shocked and surprised, but then they immediately gave it a follow. So that's kind of the idea behind all of that. Let's move on to let's see, that was step 5. Let's go to step 8. And that is distribution and content strategy. This is a nice overlap with the content marketing courseware. And this is, I look at this first off with in terms of a content strategy. You don't really need to think about social media distribution. We're going to talk about in a minute, but let's talk about the social media content strategy first. This is why I really have dug. That's why I've included the content marketing element of this course, because this is the extent of content that they talk about in this textbook. There's nothing else. It just assumes that you know what all of these things are, and you know how to promote them. Sure, this is true. You can determine all the types of content that'll comprise the post, but then what do you do? What do you do with them? How do you promote them? That's for the rest of the course for you to learn about. Because really, as I know some students are probably familiar with, if you manage a social media site, a social media presence, you are doing one of two things. You're always creating the content, right? You're always creating the posts, but there are different types of social media managers and coordinators. The first type is just taking what people send them and putting it onto social media and putting it in messaging and written content in such a way that is best for the audience. The second type is responsible for actually finding the content that goes up onto social media and optimizing it in such a way that they have a greater control over the different steps of the AIDA funnel. I personally am used to being the second part, the one who is not just writing stuff on social media, but has a full control over the content strategy. But this textbook is really kind of taking the first approach, where yes, there are plenty of social media people who do just take what's given to them, or like, hey, you can check out our website and find content to share, which is fine. But at the same time, that's not really a content strategy. You're just kind of taking what's there already and posting it online. So if we think about the stuff that you can post online, yes, content strategy, that's one thing. And this is important to know, but right now we're going to keep this really superficial. You don't need to dig into all the details because you're going to learn about almost all of these things over the coming weeks. The number 2 here, and numbers 2 and 4, I think you can ignore. I used to like include questions on exams about number 2. How often should you post per day? I would ask questions about like when the best days are to post and when the worst days and times are to post. And sure, sometimes you're going to see a little increase, but in reality, numbers 2 and 4, content mix is good. You want to always be sharing diverse content. Don't share the same stuff too many times in a row. Fine. But numbers 2 and 4, I take exception with, because every brand and every industry is different. There's a different fundamental audience that follows each brand on social media. When you look at social media, how often you should be posting, I can tell you right now, those are pretty big ranges. 5 years ago, the Twitter recommendation for how many times you should tweet per day was 10 plus. The number of LinkedIn times per day people said was never more than once. I still think you should never post more than once per day on LinkedIn. And the recommended number of Snapchat posts, stories, was literally unlimited. And with TikTok, right now, people are saying to post 5+ times. So there is a lot of different stories, different information going around. And the reason that is because every audience is different. Every audience is going to consume with posts different. Do not follow these numbers because, one, they're too vague and ambiguous. Literally, it's like reading a horoscope. Like, yeah, they're vague enough that everybody that falls within the Pisces sign, which is what I am, is going to be like, oh, this applies to me, because most people are going to be able to resonate with something that is that broad and that ambiguous. But I've done this enough to know that these are not, you should not abide by these. What you need to do is you need to post you need to vary the number of times you post per day, and then let the real-time analytics inform your decision making. One day, post once on Facebook and see how those do. Next day, maybe post twice, see how those two posts do. Maybe the next day, even post 3 times and see how the posts do. See how the different analytics of each post change as you're posting more content more consistently and more quickly. Same goes for Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. You'll be able to find you'll get some good detail into what works for you and your page. And you'll also get some really good detail into the times of day that work best for you, which takes us to number 4. Again, I fundamentally disagree with this now. 5 years ago, I thought this was Bible. And then I looked at the data first off. Those numbers, those percentages to say, hey, the best time to post on Facebook is 9 a.m. on Friday. No, do you know why that is? It's because it's like a 0.5% higher than 10 a.m. There could be so many differences between industries and individual pages that you could have a page that their best time to post could be 5 p.m. on Friday on Facebook, but they would never know it because they're busy trying to post at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. because that's what the industry average says. It's just not, it doesn't apply to everybody. This is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, to give you a nice little cliche. When I think about timings of postings, it's really going to be dependent on what works best for your audience. Different audiences are online at different times. It also depends on when they're consuming your content and who else they're following. If you think about Twitter, the best time for certain accounts to post on Twitter is going to be at night, because that's when most people are on Twitter for when they're watching TV, when they're watching sports, when they're seeing political news, things like that. But at the same time, that's also going to be the busiest time, because if you're on Twitter, you follow 200 users, 100 of them are your favorite sports people, and another 90 are people, your friends that follow those sports. You're gonna get a lot of tweets at that time that are about one concentrated subject. And then if your brand goes out there and puts something out about, I don't know, a business topic, it's likely going to get lost in the noise or ignored because people don't want to see it when they are focusing on something else. Conversely, I would argue that on something like, we'll say TikTok. TikTok is generally viewed the most at 10 p.m. and later. But again, if you think about the user intent and why people are there, if you put your brand out there at that time, yeah, sure, you might get more views, but your engagement rate might be lower and the retention rate might be lower, because people don't want to see that kind of stuff at that hour of the day. You need to try posting at different times and see at what times you're getting the highest engagement rates and the greatest reach. Take LinkedIn for another example. I would argue it's normally during business hours. That's where I've posted the most content over the last 3 years. If I ever post anything on LinkedIn on the weekends or anytime after 5, I can guarantee you the reach and the number of engagements is going to be half as if I had posted it in the middle of the day. In fact, I actually would argue that anytime after 11 a.m. is just diminishing returns on LinkedIn, because people are online less and less as the day goes on. People are more like, at least the people that are following me, are more likely to be on LinkedIn in the morning and checking before they get involved with their day-to-day grind. They might check it at the end of the day, but at that point, there's a less likely engagement rate. And they probably aren't going to click on any links or be too aware and too invested in your content, because they are trying just to move on, and they get into that's the hour where people are more likely to death scroll, which we'll talk about later. So, that's my rant on the distribution and content strategy. So, this is all really good content stuff at the top, very important, but it's very broad right now. You don't need to get too far into it. Just know that you need to put a content strategy together, a good mix. Yes, generally video performs best across all social media platforms, et cetera, et cetera. Chapters 4 through 10 provide detailed information on the best performing content types. Well, it just goes into each social media platform. Number 2, don't remember this, you're never going to see this in this class. I'm never going to put it on an exam. Now, if you have to take the quiz in this chapter, they might ask you this. I didn't write this chapter quiz, so just word to the wise. Just want to give you a disclaimer. Same with down here. Might show up on the quiz, but it certainly won't show up on the exam. The thing that will show up on the exam is the fact that you should not abide by what the experts tell you in terms of the best time of day, but that you need to figure that out for yourself. And how do you do that? By tracking, analyzing, and tuning. This is probably the most important step of all of these, if I'm being perfectly honest. Yes, the goals, objectives, and metrics are really important, because then you track, analyze, and tune those and make data-driven decisions and incremental improvements. I won't go into too much more detail on this. I think it's pretty straightforward. You want to create posts, publish them, look at the analytics within 24 hours, I would say, see how it does, then maybe change one variable when you post something else the next day, maybe change the time, maybe do it in the afternoon instead of the morning, but still, write content the same basic way. Maybe you try a different content type instead. Maybe instead of an infographic, you're posting a photo with a couple people in it. Just see what works best. There's going to be a certain mix that's going to work best for you on social media at different times of day. That's really what tuning is. It's like continuously fine tuning your strategy so that you are putting yourself in the best position to succeed. Really, when you look at social media strategy in a vacuum, you become very focused, very, very much like looking at, okay, how am I improving my KPIs? Occasionally, you do need to take a holistic worldview of the larger environment and seeing if there are external factors that are impacting your social media performance. A lot of times people are very, very focused on just their content and their content alone. But remember, people are looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of social media posts every day. And your challenge is to stand out among that crowd and to get somebody to stop the scroll and to actually read or watch or look at what it is that you're publishing. If you can do that, that's going to be a main indicator of success. And to do that, you need to be able to look at the analytics and see what posts have worked in doing that for you and what posts haven't. So that wraps up today's overview of this chapter. I mean, I would say this is probably one of the more revealing videos that we're going to look at. This video is getting a little long, but really quickly, I've already discussed social media audits. Resources, roles, and responsibilities are important, but there's almost nothing here in these two paragraphs. I don't think they go into enough detail for me to really warrant me digging into all of these things, because resources, roles, and responsibilities gets into a much bigger discussion of hiring people, the roles of interns, coordinators, higher ups, people responding on social media, providing content. That's a whole world in itself and not something I'm going to get into today. Selecting a platform might be important. And this is actually a pretty nice graphic, except there's not much here other than saying, and LinkedIn isn't good for retail and beauty, and Pinterest isn't good for education and finance. But again, this is really short, and the platform selection process is, I don't know, it's just not something that needs to be its own step. You're going to know when you identify your target market and you create your personas, you're going to know what your platform needs to be. And if not, the brand is going to dictate that for you. If you're starting a brand from scratch, my recommendation is always choose one platform and go from there. If you are taking over for an existing brand, you're stuck using what they've used. I mean, you're not going to be able to convince a company to delete a social media platform, and you're sure not going to have the time or the resources to add a new one. So you have to work within the confines of what you're given Thus, I don't think this is that important of a step. Um, Creating and optimizing social media networks, that's just creating a profile accurately. Like this is all very basic stuff. This is an MBA level course. This is not something that you need to be spending your time on. These are important. I'm not saying you don't have to do this. It's good. It's key, but um, I'm trying to make some cuts here to make these these steps a little bit easier. Finally, the social media content calendar and scheduling posts. I mean, this is exactly what we just looked at before, except it's telling you to find some place to create a calendar and schedule posts ahead of time. Um, Man, where do I start with this? This is not something you need to worry about at this point. Creating a strategy is one thing. Developing the calendar and scheduling posts is a tactical execution element that comes at a later time. When you are ready to move forward and actually write your messaging, you can do this. I also have some issues with scheduling posts ahead of time, but that's for another day. I mean, it's important to do sometimes. You're just going to have to. You can't get around it. But um, again, this is a very manual process. Like they want you to download a document here. I just don't think that this is necessary. Those 5 that I talked about before, absolutely critical. Again, those are steps 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10. Definitely look at those in depth. Only thing is, you're creating a content strategy. Don't worry about the distribution piece. When you break down step 8, numbers 1 and 3 are important. Numbers 2 and 4 are not. So that's about it. Again, we'll get into the advertising another day. That's for later in the semester, and there'll be some good stuff there. But for now, this is organic social media strategy development, and hopefully, this has been somewhat informational for you. It is it's definitely a key cog of the semester. There will be a lot of questions on the midterm that come from this chapter, more so than probably the others. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. For any questions, as always, feel free to reach out, and thank you for watching.